right, guys, well, here we are heading into Module 4. Can you believe it? You're about halfway through the program. Good for you for sticking with it. We're going to be handling a pretty fun set of questions. Who are you and what do you want? Right? No big deal. Easy questions, but we'll learn how rich and how valuable the process of asking these really good questions will be, as well as kind of learning what it is that we are made up of in terms of values, as well as what it is that we want for our lives. So throughout this lesson, we will be handling what you see in front of you on the outline. Intrinsic values, right, what just comes naturally to us. Aspirational values, what we're shooting for. How our values end up being sources of motivation and setting our priorities. This process of a verbal story and an action story, what it is that we say and what it is that we do, and how the two of those are related to each other, and why this all matters. What kinds of impacts does values clarification have on our functioning in our relationship? And I'll tell you, spoiler alert, it has a lot to do with your functioning in your relationship. So when we're asked this question of who are you and what do you want, you may come up blank with not much of an answer, but through this module we are going to gain some clarity. And so we will start with our natural or intrinsic values. I have a quote here from a writer, Anne Lamott, that I'm going to read. We begin to find and become ourselves when we notice how we are already found, already, truly, entirely, wildly, messily, marvelously who we were born to be. The only problem is that there is also so much other stuff, typically fixations about how people perceive us, how to get more of the things that we think will make us happy, and keeping our weight down. So the real issue is, how do we gently stop being who we aren't? How do we relieve ourselves of the false fronts of people-pleasing and affection, the obsessive need for power and security, the backpack of old pain, and the psychic spandex that keeps us smaller and contained? You are not your job. You are also not your Instagram account, your Facebook account, or the number of followers you have on Twitter. You are not your car nor your house. You are not your muscles or your fat. You are not your acne nor your perfect skin. You are not your children nor your friends, nor people you impress at cocktail parties or dive bars. Something that I really like about that is just this idea of we are already found. We already have a lot of substance when it comes to ourselves. The goal is to remove all of the extra stuff that comes from our anxiety and our fixations and our reactivity. So that's what we'll be doing as we're working to clarify values and kind of discover some intrinsic values. So let's start on that. We're going to do this exercise. I say do it with me right now, so then you're already done with this piece. And often these are questions that if we just set off to the side, we won't return to. So I would encourage right now getting a journal, your notepad, papers that you've been working through the program with, your phone, pull up a note on that. And I want you to do this exercise with me right now. First, start off in 3 words. I want you to describe your personality, right? You can use any sort of adjectives that you can imagine, descriptors that people over your life have kind of consistently reflected on as far as descriptions of you. So in 3 words, I want you to describe your personality. I want you on all of these just to do what's off the top of your head. Okay? Now list 5 of your most dominant interests. These can be related to work, they can be related to hobbies, They can be related to items of content that tend to come up in every relationship that you're in, right? So I want you to be paying attention to interests. These dominant interests, they've come up your whole life, or they take up a lot of space in your current life. I want you to list 5 of your most dominant interests. Now I want you to, just while I'm talking, just write out a few phrases to describe your character. Within that, I want you to include your virtues, your vices, your strengths, your weaknesses, just a few phrases that you commonly maybe have heard in reflection from others, some common perceptions that you have gathered about your own self over your life. So I want you to, just as I'm talking, quickly jot down a few phrases that describe your character. And now we are going to move through the values list that I'll also have attached under this module for your perusing later. But while we're talking through this, I want you to choose your top 5 or 10 values off this values list that I'm about to read to you as we go. So I'll tell you, before we write down those 5 or 10 values, as you're listening, you can kind of keep on journaling about these questions that I've just asked. But your intrinsic values they're items that you believe are important in the way that you live. They give you a reference to reflect on what it is that you think is good, beneficial, important, useful, desirable, constructive, right? And so for your perception of life, it's what you deem as valuable. One of the incredible things about clarifying values, as you determine exactly what they are and what is most important to you, you can then better determine your priorities so that you don't feel pulled this way and that by just general things in life. You can actually prioritize and send your energy towards things that actually you value. So having this information about yourself, in fact, is a key to making sure that your daily life is aligned with these values. And so that experience of congruence mentally is so incredibly important. It helps us manage a lot of depression and anxiety symptoms to have our internal world congruent with the way we're behaving. So clarifying values, right, is a key to making sure that your daily life ends up being aligned. And one can understand how important that process would be. So these are some of the reasons that intrinsic values they help us guide us. They help guide us, as well as the valuable things that you may learn about yourself by getting clearer understanding of what your intrinsic values are. So we will continue in the exercise now by grabbing your top 5 to 10 values as these lists come up. Just grab whatever comes off the top of your head. Don't think about it, don't judge it, don't analyze it, don't say, well, I'm this sometimes but not all the time. Just as you go, just grab 10 as I read through these, and then I'll tell you what to do as you go. Abundance, acceptance, accomplishment, accountability, achievement, comfort, commitment, community, compassion, competence, family, fearlessness, fidelity, fortitude, frankness, nature, openness, optimism, originality, partnership, right? So I'm going to have a couple more pages of these, but I want you just to be grabbing them as your attention is kind of hovers over one of them. Just go ahead and jot it down, and I'll tell you what to do in the next exercise to kind of weed out the ones that don't really belong to you. Okay, I'm going to continue on these. Acknowledgement, activeness, adventure, affection, competition, conservation, consistency, contentment, freedom, frugality, generosity, grace, patience, passion, peace, perseverance. As you keep on sifting through each of these words, and the little monitor in your brain is kicking some of them out because it says, well, you're not that way all the time. You say patience, but you just snapped at your kiddo earlier. That's okay. Right now, we're not looking for behavior that lines up with it 100% of the time. The goal is to pay attention to what you intrinsically, automatically, without any anxiety or anything else, what is it that you inherently, intrinsically value? Okay, we'll keep going. Affluence, ambition, appreciation, approval, continuity, contribution, control, conviction, gratitude, growth, harmony, health, practicality, presence, punctuality, recognition. Okay, as I'm sorting through these, I want you to be paying attention. You may actually feel a little bit critical or judgmental of some of these values, thinking, that's not the right way to be. Oh, I get why so-and-so acts that way. They probably value affluence more than maybe gratitude. And so it's important to work to have that non-judgmental, non-critical lens on when thinking about other people, because this exercise is to clarify your own personal values and not to decide which are the most important values for everyone. This is just specifically for you. Okay, here's some more. Just a few more slides of these. Artistry, assertiveness, attentiveness, awareness, balance, beauty, cooperation, courage, courtesy, curiosity, daring, decisiveness, honesty, honor, hopefulness, humility, humor, imagination, reliability, reputation, respect, rest, science, security. As you hear all of these options, you may think that there are some of these you did not even know were options to be values for people. And so that can be a helpful thing to expand your mind some so that you can see other people with that non-judgmental, compassionate perspective, recognizing the diversity within all people, that we each have the right, in a sense, to have our varying value systems. Okay, here are some more. Being the best, belonging, benevolence, boldness, bravery, dependability, depth, diligence, discipline, discretion, individuality, ingenuity, integrity, intelligence, intimacy, self-control, self-reliance, sensitivity, sexuality, solitude. You can see the wide range of the different ways that people may be experiencing the world as you see the variety of all of these values. Okay, just 2 more slides here we can reflect on. Brilliance, calmness, camaraderie, capability, carefulness, certainty, dreaming, drive, eagerness, education, effectiveness, empathy, intuitiveness, involvement, joy, justice, kindness, leadership, spirituality, strength, success, support, teamwork, truth, such a host of diversity as we look at all these values. And this will be our last slide that we'll reflect on. Challenge, change, charity, cleanliness, clear-mindedness, closeness, endurance, excellence, experience, exploration, fairness, faith, learning, logic, loyalty, love, maturity, modesty, unity, utility, variety, vision, warmness, and wisdom. Whew, okay. We made it through a whole bunch of values, and of course, there are thousands more that one could list, but this is just a starter to consider what are some of your intrinsic values. And so the goal is to pick, say, 10 of those. You might have 50 listed. That's okay. It's a great place to start, and I want you to be paring those down, and I'll talk to you exactly about what you'll need to do in order to weed out the ones that may not be a great fit. Our next practice is going to be clarifying our aspirational values. And so these are things that we're maybe not fully, haven't fully come into, but they are really important to us. They have to do a lot with what we can contribute to the world, to our community, to our family, and the things that we see as important in what it is that we leave, maybe when we are considering legacy or things like that. So the aspirational values exercise, let's kind of shake our brain a little bit and get, we've moved on past those lists, and now we're going to consider some aspirational values. So first in this exercise, you can kind of use that same piece of paper that you had before, as well as maybe your notes app is open in your phone, so you can be taking a few notes there. So this is one way to think about aspirational value. So if you have a mentor, I want you to describe what it is that you admire about them. And if you don't have one yet, then maybe describe some qualities you'd like your mentor to have. Qualities that you would want to emulate that seem really valuable to you. I want you to also think about some situations and the situations in which you're engaging with other people. What type of people do you deal with most often? And think about some of the greatest joys and the greatest challenges in dealing with them. How would you like to deal with these different people that tend to come across your path? Right, so I want you to kind of focus in on this question. The greatest joys you have and the greatest challenges that you have in dealing with other people. Now I want you to consider some traits of people that when you meet them, you just feel drawn in. You kind of can't help, the conversation lingers, you end up asking a bunch of questions, you find yourself wanting to spend more time with them after your time is over. What are some of the traits of people that you meet that draw you in or make you want to spend more time with them? What are some descriptive adjectives? What are maybe some values that are so clearly expressed in their lives that have you feeling drawn towards them? So this can begin your list of your aspirational values. I just listed all of those values. You can list the same ones, or you can use that same list rather, to gather some of your intrinsic values as well as your aspirational values. And like I said, I'll attach this values list to the module, so you don't have to listen back through my reading of all of them, but that you can just pull it up and visually have a look at it. So now we'll shift into the reasons for gathering together this data and information about yourself and how you can start applying it in your own support of your relationship as well as becoming the best version of you. So I want to describe these two ideas, verbal story and action story. Simply put, verbal story is what you say you believe, so the values you espouse, and your action story is what you do, what your behavior speaks with your actions. And so that seems pretty clear, right? Verbal story, what you say you believe, action story, what it is that you do. And so that is a really helpful start in looking at our lives from the perspective of attempting to confront our own self when we've missed the mark. Because when we are working towards responsibility to, right, not responsibility for anymore, if we want our partner to trust that they can manage them and stay off our back, one of the ways we can do this is by getting really good at confronting our own self, being honest about where we have missed the mark, and make amends when we need to. That actually allows our partner to trust and settle back, take better care of their own self, and be in our business a little bit less. And so with our verbal story and our action story, we are going to be working on this process of decreasing cognitive dissonance, right? So cognitive dissonance is that experience where your verbal story and your action story are not in alignment with each other. Something, either what you're saying you believe or what you're doing, are different from each other, and it's causing some symptoms. That is what that cognitive dissonance is, which, right, it increases symptoms of anxiety and depression. And so what we know is getting our verbal story and our action story more in line with each other creates better mental health, better feelings of well-being, better general sense of wellness in life. And so one of the processes that I'm going to be talking about is the option to begin journaling about your verbal story and your action story so that you can decide what it is that you're going to do when your verbal story and action story do not align with each other. So one of the things that I want you to start doing is, out of those intrinsic values, I want you to grab maybe 3 of them and write them down in the corner of some journal, or maybe at the bottom of your to-do list or something like that. And I want you to, so say you pick patience, compassion, and generosity as intrinsic values of yours. I want you to then be looking for evidence within your action story that reflects, yes, I do actually value those things. And I want you to pay attention to when you don't come up with much evidence, as well as times when you come up with whole loads of evidence, to start getting a clear sense of truly what your intrinsic values are, which helps you understand this question of who are you and what do you want. That's one of the functions of this journaling exercise that you can consider. You may be wondering, all this talk about values, why does it matter? And something that's really important to consider is that when we think back to that list of responsibility to, you might have asked yourself, okay, if I'm not being responsible for my partner, what am I being responsible to? Here are the answers. You're being responsible to your values. That is what answers that question. When you are getting all sideways about your partner's discomfort, what will stabilize you is your intention to be responsible to your own values, right? So this values list, both intrinsic and aspirational, are the source of information for your responsibility to list. Another thing that's incredibly important about clarifying your values is that they stabilize you. When you are working to make a decision, when you're working to manage your overwhelm, when you're working to set your priorities, the clarification of your values can be incredibly stabilizing. Another way they can be stabilizing is when disapproval comes our direction. There are two forces in life. One is approval and one is disapproval. And those two forces send us all over the map. We run away from disapproval and we run towards approval. And sometimes we don't end up being the best version of us in that process. And so when we have gotten very clear on what our values are, our ability to handle disapproval can be much increased. Our resilience and adaptability in handling other people's disapproval and discomfort goes way up when we know what is truly important to us. And it also, right, in this sense, would also make a lot of sense that it would help us be able to handle our partner's discomfort. If we are in a situation where our partner is having a good amount of stress and irritability in a situation, and we are, maybe one of our values, I go back to compassion, that's one of my most deeply held intrinsic values, then what we may do, we may decide not to rescue, but to listen well, because compassion asks us to listen and to pay attention to their discomfort. If we try to rescue, we're probably going to get overwhelmed and we're probably going to cut off, right? So you can see how that value of compassion helps us handle our partner's discomfort. In a situation of handling disapproval, I'll give you a small example. One day I walked into an office that I was sharing with a colleague of mine, and it was the time that I had reserved the office, but she kind of sliced her eyes over at me. She was on the phone, and I just felt a shudder of shame go through my whole body, and then rage. I was embarrassed that I might have stepped on her toes and seemed unprofessional, and I was also angry because I knew I hadn't. I knew it was the right time for me to be there. And so one of the things I noticed afterwards is that I feared I was coming across as unprofessional. I feared that I was barging in and being annoying or irritating to someone. And so in an effort to try to calm myself down, using my values to handle disapproval, I checked in with myself. And I knew that professionalism and accuracy were high values of mine. So I double checked my calendar and calmed myself down, knowing that I had not, in fact, crossed some boundary, and that whatever was happening probably was something going on in her life. And so settled myself down, got my feet back on the floor, and calmed down instead of taking it deeply personal. And come to find out, of course, her child had woken up 4 times the night before, and she was just kind of in tatters emotionally that day, and it had nothing to do with me. And I was actually able to listen to her compassionately because I was able to calm myself down and not take it personal. So you can see how that whole situation, led by values, could actually help me navigate an interpersonal relationship item that came up. Really, really helpful. So you can see all of these different descriptions of why values clarification is so incredibly important. All right, so here we are at just about at the end. I want to describe one last thing before I talk about your homework. So as you know, I love the idea of spectrums, and I love talking about both ends, too much of something and too little of something, and the helpfulness of finding the middle road. So as you work on clarifying both your intrinsic and aspirational values, you may kind of get stuck in the analysis of them sometimes. And I'll tell you that any value taken to either extreme, either too much or too little, is going to have some challenges to it, right? So with compassion, on one end, you may take on other people's problems in a way that's not that helpful, and on the other end, you may cut off from people. With patience, too much of that, right? You may end up being a doormat. Too little, you may end up being rigid or inflexible. Even clarity, right? Too much, pursuing too much, maybe you come across as being a know-it-all or not being open to other people's thinking. And then maybe too little of it, you may be really inconsistent and only led by your emotions. And so you can see that the goal is to find that middle road version of your intrinsic and aspirational values, and that any value kind of taken to an extreme can end up causing some problems and some symptoms. And so now we will shift into your homework. You made it. We made it through the 4th module. You've made it halfway. Give yourself a pat on the back for sticking with it. This is a lot of thinking and just kind of thinking about yourself in this exercise, in this module. So good for you for sticking with it. So let me just go through a couple items on your homework, right? So I want you to take note of some of the intrinsic values that grabbed your attention. I want you to take note of some of the values when you are thinking about it from the aspirational perspective. And then I want you to work on what you will be adjusting when it comes to your verbal story and your action story. You can be asking some of those questions when you have your date night, and get curious about what your partner noticed and about what they were learning as well. Okay, so that's the end of Module 4 with the homework guidance, and I will see you in the next video.